What if the fairy tales we grew up with were really about control, confinement, and the slow burn of becoming someone new? Today, I talk with Stephanie Parent about her poetry collection, Cinder Girl Grows Wings, a visceral lyrical journey through girlhood, desire, body image, and BDSM. If you'd like to support the show, consider subscribing to my Patreon. You'll get exclusive access to weekly book and film reviews, along with a narrative fiction audio drama narrated by me, Vincent Midgard. Every week, you'll get a new story and insights you won't hear anywhere else. So without further ado, I give you Stephanie Parent. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 19th day of May 2025. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show the first time to discuss your surreal tale of the total transcendent environment of a BDSM dungeon in your novel, The Briars. So I was really looking forward to exploring your poetry to see how you used free verse to tell a story and immerse the reader in feeling and atmosphere. Your collection, entitled Cinder Girl Grows Wings, was just as immersive as your prose, with a gothic sensibility interlaced with cynicism in some places and quiet resignation in others. Overall, it offered a truly unique perspective, one that made you think as much as feel. So thank you for joining me on the show today to discuss this exquisite work.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Quite welcome. Well, so the title, Cinder Girl Grows Wings, is very abstract. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
It's basically just going back to my obsession with fairy tales. The Cinder Girl could be like another way of saying Cinderella. So I think that's where I first got the idea for that. And then one of the individual poems in the collection, I believe, uses the same like wording. So that's kind of where I got it from. But I think it's sort of fusing the fairy tale influence, which is always an inspiration for me, and especially the idea of a fairy tale character kind of having to go through some sort of suffering, like Cinderella, has to be basically a slave to her stepsisters and sleep in the cinders, which is why she's called Cinderella, and then transcending out of that. So that's where the growing wings comes from, and like the idea of a phoenix and the fire, cinders, all kind of comes together there in that phrase.
Yeah, very linear and kind of all comes together. I like that. And you speak of your love of fairy tales, not right now, but we'll get to it. There's a photo shoot I wanted to talk to you about on the subject of fairy tales. So we'll put a pin in that, though. So the collection is organized into 4 sections: Kindling, Inferno, Ashes, and as you just spoke about, Phoenix. So let's start with Kindling, the spark before the blaze. What emotional or narrative space does this section explore? I was going to ask if it's a beginning, but yeah, obviously it's the beginning. But a warning or something else?
The use of the word kindling, implying that there could be a fire, it should indicate a warning to a perceptive reader, but the speaker of the poems, who is basically me, because most of them are autobiographical, I don't think she would perceive it as a warning, because at the time the kindling, the spark, would represent more desire and hope for a different future and not really worry about whether that might be destructive or not, but just kind of like a desire that can't be denied because it's hot, it's starting to burn.
Hmm. And is it at that point there's a decision to live with the discomfort or run, or is that something that comes later?
Um, I think that's when the decision is being pondered. So it hasn't quite been made yet. Because you're right, there's still the opportunity to back out at that point.
Yeah.
so so it's kind of the back and forth between yes, am I willing to go through discomfort and potential destruction in order to try to get what I want.
Yeah, the opportunity was first posed to me just after I turned 21, and I decided to run until I was 32. Yeah. Not a good idea. Any young people listening? Not a good idea. Just get it over with. Well, so your poem entitled "You Learn" is the opening poem of the collection. Why did you choose to begin with this piece, and what tone or message did you want it to set for the reader?
Well, it introduces one of the main kind of themes that pops up throughout, or three themes or recurring imagery, which is the idea of dolls. A big question the speaker is struggling with throughout this collection is the idea of how much agency does she have and how much is she being controlled by those around her or even by her own desires. So I think this poem kind of sets that up right at the beginning and suggests that that type of outlook on life probably starts early in life in a child feeling that they don't really have control in one way or another, which is something that happens to a lot of children because we can't really control what family we're born into. And even in the best family situation, we all have kind of our parents or caretakers expectations and their hopes and dreams kind of placed upon us,
Hmm.
and in some cases more than others, many children aren't really allowed to grow up to be authentically exactly who they would want to be, but they're told what they're expected to do or what their caregivers hope will be they will grow into or will focus on. So I guess just that idea basically of the struggle between independence and following your own path and then feeling that you don't have that kind of control and that other people or even fate is in control.
Yeah, it's funny how like tradition in some ways can you don't want to be eternally in the state of a child, but at the same time you don't want to be like anytime I think of the word tradition, at least in some ways, not all. I want to be clear about that because nobody needs to eternally be a child. But like my personal experience, it makes me think of you've seen the video for "The Wall" by Pink Floyd, where all the kids are on the conveyor belt and just being dumped into that, what is it, sausage maker? Yeah. Well, so the poem 1999 is filled with vivid references to late 90s girlhood. Britney, Christina, Playboys, shampoo commercials, and as we spoke of, fairy tales. How do you think the experiences of girls growing up today compared to the ones you capture in 1999? Has the culture changed or has it just been rebranded?
A little bit of both, but honestly, I would say mostly just rebranded. And in fact, I think it's probably harder for girls now just because of social media. All the cultural messaging is so much more pervasive, can't get away from it. Like in the 90s, there were no smartphones. So yes, you would see pop culture on your TV and in magazines, but you would also get away from it, go outside, hang out with your friends, read a book, and now it's just everywhere. And the line between like fantasy and reality, I think, is a lot more blurred now, especially for children and teenagers who don't have the same critical reasoning to understand that what they're seeing on social media is idealized, not real. So, when people are like using filters or selectively only filming a small portion of their space that looks perfect and like
Yeah.
or like only showing the highlights of their life. So I think it is harder now. I do think that on the other hand, there has been a lot of greater understanding about like different identities and mental health issues and neurodiversity and all kinds of things. So we are more aware of that and as a culture and to be more understanding of that. So I think that's good, but I don't think it changes the fact that there's always going to be like ideals, cultural ideals, and kind of a push to conformity, especially for teenagers. So it's good that we know now, like that we can say, like, okay, yes, I have autism, I have ADHD, I'm an introvert, or I'm gay, I'm bisexual. Like it was not quite as accepted to say those things back in the 90s, but it still doesn't change the fact that like there's all these cultural expectations for perfection or for being a certain way that are placed on young people. And social media probably just makes that even more pervasive, I would say.
Yeah, I'm not very well plugged into pop culture. Probably better than some, but definitely not the most plugged in. So I don't have quite a firm grasp on the pulse of pop culture. But I know that such a thing as body positivity exists. Do you think that girls are still held to that same crazy standard that they were at least back when I was like young adult? Because, like you mentioned Playboy, or I mentioned Playboy. I mean, you went from physically airbrushed to photoshopped to Instagram filters, and now there's AI. So
Yeah.
it's like hyper reality is
Yeah. I think it depends. Like, I think that the body positivity is good. And I think that it probably helps a lot of young women. But I still think that overall, for the average person scrolling social media and the things they choose to follow, they're probably going to see more women who are using filters and AI or whatever to look as perfect as possible and present that as reality. So I think it's probably still pretty harsh. And actually, more recently, with like our government becoming more conservative, people have been noting that there's actually now more of a trend toward like being very thin, interestingly enough, and are like saying that that tends to happen when government becomes more conservative. So like in the like early 2000s, the Bush era, the same thing happened. This like super skinny aesthetic was popular, and now it's kind of coming back.
interesting.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm pretty unobservant. Well, the next poem, That Darn Cat, brought back a wave of nostalgia as it directly references the old Disney movie I remember watching as a kid. Blast from the past. In the poem, you talk about envying both the cat that could go anywhere and the woman tied to the chair who could go nowhere. So, how does that dichotomy relate to your experience with BDSM?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you described it very well. It's like like I guess from a young age, nobody really knows why their BDSM desires come up one way or another. I think a lot of times it just kind of happens. So I was always sort of drawn to the more submissive side from a very young age. So if I saw like an image of somebody tied up, restrained, things like that, I would just be very interested and excited and did not know why I was drawn to that because it seems like something you would not want to happen to you, right? So as a little kid to be like, oh, that looks interesting. That looks like something I want to happen to me. That's very confusing. So I think that is the dichotomy there. It's like part of you is drawn to this, but you don't understand why. And most people naturally want to be independent and free. So that's like the other side of you. So if you have a desire that's going against what you would naturally want, in your life, which is to have self-control and autonomy. It's confusing, and it's never really gets easier because those two sides are always going to kind of coexist and be at war with each other a little bit.
Yeah, and it wasn't really, as odd as it sounds, it wasn't really until I read your poem that it dawned on me like, I don't know, I guess I had it in my head that with BDSM, it's something that you experiment with and you find out you like it. But
Mhm.
you're saying just the visual. I mean, it's just this natural inclination.
I mean, having like worked in BDSM and done it personally, I've talked to a lot of people who are in it, and I would say probably out of, obviously it's just personal experience. I have not done a huge study or anything, but I would say probably at least like 75% of the people who are really into it had an inclination from early childhood. Like many of them can point to something they remember as being their first fascination with it, whether it was like a Disney movie seems to be a big one for a lot of people, like the Aladdin movie when Jasmine is in the hourglass. A lot of people say that, or Wonder Woman. Any superhero type thing is another big one for people because there's a lot of stuff with somebody being tied up and kind of lightly tortured and that kind of stuff. Or if you go even further back, like detective stories, women tied to the railroad tracks, like most people who are really into BDSM have that in memory, or it might be something from their own life, like if they remember that their mother was the more dominant member of the family and they were somehow aware of that, or something like that. Or people who develop a fetish, they'll be like, I remember my mom putting on pantyhose, and then they have a fetish for pantyhose, things like that. But yeah, it can also happen the other way. It could just be, somebody wants to experiment and then they discover that they are more into it than they realize. So certainly both are a possibility.
I bet they were hard to discipline as children. What are you going to do? Don't threaten me with a good time.
Well, that's another thing that some people say is that the actual act of, or the experience of having been disciplined as a child is what got them into it. I forgot about that one, but that's because I was not like ever physically disciplined. But some people say that that's why they're into it also.
So your next poem, Thinner, is very short and very ethereal. Can you talk about the relationship between body and space in this piece? The way narrowness, smallness, and vanishing seem to offer relief, but also reflect confinement?
I think you just said it really well.
I need to make these questions shorter.
The poem gets narrower as it goes along. But yeah, I never had a severe eating disorder, so this is a little less personal than some of the other poems, but I certainly had body image issues and some issues around food. But I think a lot of young women get messaging from culture about diet, and then they realize that that's an easy way to gain self-control in a world where you don't have a lot of control, because it's one thing that you can generally control is what you eat, whether that's only eating healthy foods or clean foods, clean in quotation marks, or only eating at certain times, whatever it is. So it's it feels like control, and it feels like almost a purification in some ways, the idea of getting smaller and maybe being more attractive in that way. But then it's also obviously destructive, and if it takes over your life, then actually you're out of control, you're not in control. And it's also a way to avoid the real problems you have in your life, because if you're just focusing on this one thing that you control when everything else is still out of control, you're not going to fix that problem. So that was basically the idea. And it just makes your world very narrow, I guess would be. So from having a lot of possibilities down to getting narrower and smaller when you're only focusing on, what you're eating, your body image, you lose a lot of life that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up a good point. This one, the way it's written, it's like a sliver. It just kind of goes down into a point. A lot of the poems, the way they're written, kind of have a form that goes along with the subject matter. I'm trying to think of another one off the top of my head. What's another one?
Do you know? I have the book, so I can.
Oh, you got the book right there.
I mean, some of them, I don't know if they exactly. I guess there's the one called "Read the Stars." Does
where it's kind of like a constellation.
Yeah,
splashed
turns
all
into a
around.
constellation at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like to kind of divide two ideas on different halves of the page, or just use some kind of visual organization. It's interesting to me to do that.
Yeah, I like that. Well, or piggybacking right off that, in your next poem, Read the Stars, I was struck by the line, "To become a black hole, absorb men's gazes in my gravity." And that is a potent image of objectification and power. So do you see this line as a commentary on objectification, or is there also agency in the act of absorbing attention?
I think it could be both, but I think it's more a commentary on, especially like in that late 90s, early 2000s era that I'm writing about in this portion of the book, like women were objectified a lot. And then as like feminism was developing in that era, there was an odd sort of feminism that developed, which was like kind of not really feminist because it was like women should just like go along. It was like very like fraternity culture. It was like women should be feminist by accepting the way that men objectify them and like laughing along with it and going along with it and being into it. It was a weird time. So I guess that's kind of a commentary on that on in that if you would internalize that viewpoint, then you would think that like the most as a woman, you would think the most powerful you could be would be by being the best object and absorbing the most gazes. So it is sort of a commentary, but then I think at the same time there could be a legitimate power in that in some way, depending on what you do with that male attention that you have.
I mean, you
So
could, if you wanted to, you could weaponize it, I'm sure.
you could weaponize it, yes. But certainly, like as a younger person, like fantasizing about your future, I think it's easy to imagine that you could weaponize it and turn it into a sort of power. So it's like an alluring idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, we come to the next section, and obviously there's more poems in the first section. It's not going to be exhaustive. I just wanted to get a good cross section of the poems in the collection. But the next section is Inferno, and it evokes intensity, danger, passion, even destruction. And in literature and myth, descent into fire is often a rite of transformation. Fire is often portrayed as either destructive or purifying, especially in alchemy. So in your poems, do you see it as both, or does one dominate?
I think it's definitely both. I think like destruction seems to be dominating earlier in the collection, and then as we move more toward the end of the collection is where the purity starts to emerge, but it's like on the other side of destruction, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Well, I believe it's the first poem in the section, My Dungeon Love Affair. There's a line that really lingers, quote, I never imagined love could change so much what I'd lose. What did love cost you in this context, and how did it redefine your understanding of it?
So I think in this part of the book, I was thinking of my love for wanting to have like an alternative lifestyle in that I like worked at a BDSM dungeon and had this more like kind of sexual job and things like that. So it was my love for that lifestyle rather than a particular person. Although it does also kind of encompass I was a particular person, my boyfriend, while I was working there, who is mentioned in a lot of the poems. So it could be both, but more like really jumping into that BDSM lifestyle and like falling in love with it. And honestly, it was very destructive. Like I would have to say, like, I don't think there's any way that I could have avoided doing it because I wanted to do it so badly, but it was probably more bad than good overall. Like, I would say, in terms of like the type of people you encounter who tend to be like takers or users, like you don't really get a lot back. Like you have a lot taken out of you, and unless you have very strong boundaries, you don't really get a lot back. So I think that was kind of what I was referring to there. But just and then taking it to a greater level of like myths and fairy tales and all those stories that I like to reference in my poems. Generally, like a great love or a great desire involves a great loss in stories like that. And in life, like, if you love something, then it's going to hurt more if you lose it or if it turns around and hurts you. And that's just kind of what happens. That's kind of the way life is. You can't really avoid it, unless you just stay in your house and don't do anything. Then that's really the only way to avoid loss and pain and being hurt.
That becomes a kind of loss and pain itself.
Yes, that's true.
Well, To backtrack a little bit, when you were talking about takers, were you talking about relationships, like romance relationships, or just any?
Like just in a job term, like so like working at the dungeon, or you have a boss and they are focused on making money for the dungeon, so they want you to see all the clients so that they get their cut, even if they're not good clients and they're gonna like not, if they're gonna hurt you physically or emotionally, so they don't care, they just want their cut. And then just like there are a lot of doms in the BDSM world who are not real doms, and they're just, I guess, takers. That's what you would say. They would
Yeah,
just want to hurt someone or feel like they have power over someone, and there's not the real reciprocal exchange of energy or respect for boundaries that there would be in real, safe, ethical BDSM.
gotcha. Well, your next poem, entitled A Terrible Idea, wrestles with the what ifs with lines like, would his tenderness have lasted long enough to shelter us when the sun fled and the sky froze? So, do you think writing this poem was a way of answering that question or simply sitting with it?
I personally, it's hard for me to say because it's based on a real experience, so I know what happened. But to me, as the writer, I feel like it answers the question. I don't know if you are reading the poem without having my past experience, but to me, it seems like if you read this poem, which is about somewhat of an abusive relationship, it's pretty obvious from the poem that it would never have worked out,
Yeah.
But I think whenever you're in a relationship that is really good sometimes, and where you are feeling a real emotional bond with the other person, like, and then things don't work out, there's always going to be this part of you that's like, what if, because real emotional bonds don't happen that often. So it's something that's very hard to let go of.
Yeah, I guess I forget that a lot of what you write is autobiographical. I'm just thinking in the terms of, is this about a woman that has kind of been gaslighted to the
Mhm.
point where, she's like,
In my mind, in this case, she's not, she knows, like deep down, she knows, but she's just kind of thinking about it anyway, as you do in life, like wishing things could have worked out better.
yeah. Well, in your poem, Confessions of a Professional Submissive, there's a fascinating reflection on the textures of touch, the way hands feel regardless of gender, the difference between kindness and violence. So, what did you learn about perception and physical memory through your experience as a submissive, and I guess perhaps a Dom as well? Because you were a switch, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
eventually, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like a very visceral job, and you get very close to a lot of people. Like, there's very few jobs like that. I would say, like, probably doctors, nurses, maybe even massage therapists would have a similar experience. But it's just a lot to be so physically close to so many people, and there is like a big exchange of energy, and it's very challenging. Like it causes a lot of burnout, honestly, to do something like that for a long time, which I definitely experienced. And I guess that would add to what we were talking about earlier with like the idea of like takers and things like that. I think some of it is probably just burnout. Like these are very intense experiences and intense like connection with people that maybe for certain personality types, it's not ideal to do that like several times a week as your job, because I've sort of figured out also through this job that I'm like a highly sensitive person. So very easily like overwhelmed by things like that. But yeah, I think I became more aware of like physical touch and the physical reality of bodies doing that job than I'd ever really been before. And it's very much like living in your body and being hyper aware of your body and how it looks and how it feels and comparing it to others, which can be quite overwhelming at times. But yeah, it's just an interesting experience, I guess, of being human because we do have bodies and we do have skin, and a lot of our emotions and our sense of self, our values is tied to our outer self, whether we want it to be or not.
Well, kind of piggybacking yet again off that sentiment, in your poem, My Body Has Never Been a Temple, you describe your body as both a spring field sprouting wildflowers and a barren field slick with ice. How do these shifting metaphors reflect your relationship with your body over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a pretty universal experience that I'm talking about in that one, although I maybe take it more to an extreme of self-loathing at times than many people would. But I think everybody can relate that at sometimes when you're feeling good about life and yourself and you do have that connection to your body and you feel good and it feels like something blooming and like hope and new possibilities and good. And then there are other times when that's not the case, like for whatever reason you don't feel good about your body. Like for me, a lot of times it was just not being able to control, like by the time I was at the dungeon, it was not so much weight but like skin, if I was having like acne or skin issues, just things that you can't control and like wanting so badly to control and not being able to. It's kind of a reflection of how you're feeling inside or what you've been doing and who you've been associating with, and it gets so wrapped up that you don't know what started first. Like, did you start feeling bad about yourself first and then that's reflecting on your skin but that's making you feel worse, or was it the skin started first and that made you feel bad and that starts to make you feel bad about inside? It's like a vicious cycle that's hard to get out of and hard to remember that you also have those wildflowers blooming inside of you. But yeah, so I feel like that one could be both personal, but hopefully something that other people can relate to as well.
And this is kind of a digression, listeners at home. I apologize, but it just, for some reason, it came to my mind. When you were on the show the last time and we were talking about the Briars, did you tell me that that particular dungeon no longer functions? It's not there anymore?
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. Yes.
Do you have a picture of it?
I did at one point. I think it's on my Instagram. I don't know if I
Oh, is
still
it?
have it on my phone, but yeah, I had a trailer for the Briars, and I think that included a picture of the dungeon, but like after it had closed and was overgrown. But I did have some pictures of the inside. They might be actually. I think they're in the trailer for my other book, my nonfiction book.
Okay.
But it's just still be on my Instagram.
Well, the
I
reason
included in the trailer.
yeah, the reason I ask is because I have such a vivid like picture of it in my head from your
Uh-huh.
book, and I'm just curious
Yeah.
to know. Like, I'm sure it's just diametrically opposed to what I have in my head, but
I mean, that's usually what happens when
yeah,
people make their own images out of a book. But
yeah. Well, circling back to your book of poetry, we come to the section Ashes. Ashes often symbolize destruction's consequence, but also what remains, a moment of stillness and reflection. Ashes can be symbolic of grief, numbness, even survival. So, were you writing from a place of emotional exhaustion or clarity when working on this section?
I was actually writing probably more from a place of clarity because it was quite a while after everything I'd been talking about in the book had happened to me. But some of the poems themselves do describe more of that state of emotional exhaustion or despair, but I was not writing them while in that state. So, not quite the same amount of immediacy to it.
Gotcha. Well, so in your poem, Ugly Love, you write about never daring to believe you were worthy of love. How did that belief or lack of it influence the kinds of relationships you sought or accepted?
Well, yeah, I think that was why I fell into somewhat emotionally abusive relationship that I portrayed in the book. I mean, I guess it seems a little cliche, but yeah, if you don't really think you're worthy of being fully loved for who you are, then you probably are going to be drawn to people who don't treat you very well.
Which is
Um,
bizarre when you think about it. Like, just,
yeah, I mean, I think like just that self criticism started a really young age for whatever reason for me. And yeah, it's hard to, and I guess if you are very critical of certain parts of yourself, you're not willing to show those parts to people, so you're never really going to have that fully trusting relationship with somebody if you're never going to show them all the ugly parts of yourself. So it's kind of, at least in the book for me, I think there's an element of like, it's not all the other person's fault, both parties are part of having unsatisfactory relationships, both like personal romantic relationship and also even like in work. If you're not willing to stand up for yourself and assert your boundaries, then people are going to walk all over you. It's kind of the way it is.
Well, wise proverb. You have no right to complain about that which you need not subject yourself. Well, you write about being placed on a pedestal, trapped under glass, a blossom in a greenhouse. It's a beautiful yet claustrophobic image. Can you talk about the emotional contradiction of being both worshipped and confined?
Yeah, so it's like, so honestly, a little different from like what we've been talking about before, because I wouldn't say this is the same as the idea of like being emotionally abused, but in terms of like my work, I would say there are some men who kind of put women up on a pedestal a bit and just like it's really a form of objectification, like just saying how beautiful, how amazing, all this stuff, but you're not seeing the real person when you do that. So it's almost as harmful as only seeing the negative parts of a person. It's very uncomfortable to be put on a pedestal. Like it sounds weird, but it really is. Like, because it's just this idea that this person is not seeing who you really are, and is not listening to you, and it's very frustrating. And it's also kind of a form of pushing somebody's boundaries, even if it's like in a polite or giving way. It seems like if somebody's giving you a whole bunch of gifts as if you're perfect, and it's like, well, I didn't ask for this, I didn't want you to give me this, and you're giving them to this like perfect doll, going back to the idea of doll, who you think you're interacting with and not a real person. So I would say that's a very confining thing to do to someone. So that's the idea of like it being a different type of cage that someone could be put into. And then, of course, there's always, if you are really in a relationship with somebody like that who's putting you on a pedestal, there's always that question of like, when are they going to see the flaws, and is everything going to fall apart?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like walking on eggshells a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost kind of an addiction to a infatuation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You get that idealized image that you're just like getting all of this dopamine from.
Mm-hmm.
And as you talked about giving gifts, like giving people excessively giving, what am I trying to say here?
Gifts or praise or anything like that. Compliments.
Well, yeah, but like specifically in the form of tangible gifts, giving somebody an excessive amount of gifts is a type of control because you feel like you're indebting them to you in a way, and not just for not like sexual favors or something, but like just they should feel as strongly towards you as you do to them because you're doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. There's some relationship dynamics can be really twisted and not in like when people think twisted relationship dynamics, they think like physical abuse, which obviously is, but like they forget about the subtle emotional shit you can do to each other. It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in your next poem, The Longest Goodbye, the poem blends grief, tenderness, and fantasy. At times, it reads almost like a love letter to what might have been. Do you see this piece more as closure or as longing?
So I would say that The Longest Goodbye was more closure for me, in the way that it actually kind of idealized the relationship that I'm talking about in the poem. It made it feel more beautiful as I was looking back at it, romanticized it a bit, and in a way that made it less real. So that is a closure. Like, well, you're romanticizing something, you're kind of putting it in the past, you're making it into a story. It's over, so now you can do whatever you want to it in your head, but it's not going to happen, and it's not real anymore. But that is the kind of cool thing about writing and telling stories, is you can kind of like make new meaning out of things that happened, and remember the beautiful parts as well as the hard parts.
Gotcha. Well, now we come to the final section, the phoenix. And the phoenix is one of the most enduring symbols across mythologies: Egyptian, Greek, Chinese, a mythical bird that burns and is reborn from its own ashes. And I mean, you hear it even in pop songs, alternative rock songs. It's just, utilized so much. So, did you ever feel resistant to writing from a place of healing, like you weren't ready yet, or worried about resolving something that still felt raw?
I did not when I was writing this. I think it helped that I had already moved across the country when I wrote almost, if not all, of these poems, because I had been living in Los Angeles, which is where most of these poems are set. And then I moved back to Baltimore, Maryland at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think that helped me to get the closure faster than I would have otherwise, probably, because it was just, in a completely different environment, and my lifestyle completely changed, partly just because of the pandemic. Everybody's lifestyle changed. So I wouldn't say it was hard. I mean, sometimes when I'm writing really emotional stuff, I'll like get a little nauseous. So that happened when I was writing some of these, but I think it was helpful to write these poems because I'd written most of them kind of, or at least half of them, I would say, like individually, like as individual poems, because an idea came for me or because of like a call for submissions or something like that. But then I realized that I had a lot that were kind of similar in these themes and decided to make them into more of a narrative and fill in the gaps. So I think that process was a good kind of healing and closure for me.
So, the first poem in the Phoenix section is called Born This Way. And the poem opens with, "Tell me I'm beautiful and I'll show you my ugly." That tension between validation and self destruction runs throughout the piece. What does ugly mean to you in the context of this poem?
So that's an interesting question. So it obviously does mean more than physical ugliness. I think it's just more probably an idea of like not feeling worthy, which is something that comes back throughout the poem. But I do think physical ugliness or just not feeling good enough physically is a part of it. And that goes back to like the obsession with fairy tales that I have had since a young age and has been running through this collection, because as much as I love fairy tales, one of the issues with them is that they tend to use beauty as a shorthand for goodness and ugliness as a shorthand for badness, because they're short stories. They don't have a lot of character development. They tend to, work on symbolism. So like a lot of fairy tales will start with like, there was a beautiful princess. And when we hear that, we're supposed to know, oh, that means she's good. And then she had an ugly stepsister. Oh, that means she was bad. So that is like a problem with fairy tales. If you read a lot of them, is that that stuff kind of gets internalized. So I think it's both, but it's like this idea that somehow your physical appearance should like reflect your inner self. It's problematic and can create like a lot of psychological torment, even if you know logically that it's not true and it doesn't make sense. I think our culture and most cultures in the world have at some way supported the idea that certain physical ideals represent goodness or people who are more worthy of being happy or loved or this or that. So yeah, I think it's tough. It's something that a lot of people struggle with, and certainly that I've struggled with.
Yeah, kind of related to that, something that I never thought about until a friend of mine pointed it out. Somehow, I can't even remember what we were talking about. I brought up Beauty and the Beast, and they were like, "I hate that." I was like, "Why? Why?" Like she had this visceral hatred of this story. It's like, because it says that a person can be considered good and have inner beauty as long as you're a man. It's like,
That's kind of true.
oh,
It's more forgivable for men.
yeah, I got it. Okay. Well, I will not bring that up again. Well, in your poem, Nine Lives, Two Eyes, we revisit the film That Darn Cat. I'm a fan. I dig it. And you reference scars and memories that I could not exercise. So, how does this poem allow those past selves to coexist rather than be erased?
Well, I think like kind of the idea of, storytelling that I've been doing throughout the collection is how you allow those things to coexist. Because when you make something into a story and you retell it, then you can make meaning out of things that maybe weren't meaningful at the time. They just hurt, and they weren't intentional, and they didn't make sense. Like if you got scars, literal or figurative scars that were unfortunate and you wish you didn't have, but now that you do have them, you can like make a meaning out of them and look back at them in a different way, like with different eyes, different perspective. And it's kind of cliche, but like the idea of like, well, if X hadn't happened to me, then I wouldn't have done Y. So like if I hadn't worked at the dungeon, then I probably would not have started writing poetry again, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like not erasing the bad parts of what happened, but looking at them in a different way.
Gotcha. Well, your next poem, The Woolsey Witches, the phrase, quote, "I wish I could find that beauty in a body that gave too much away," feels like a central ache. How does this poem speak to the aftermath of overextension, emotionally, physically, and professionally?
Yeah, I think this poem is definitely just like the burnout poem. The idea of like everything just being at the end of your rope, and because I was inspired to write this poem after seeing Malibu after one of the Los Angeles wildfires, and just like everything being destroyed. So it's just that idea of like everything being so barren, but there was a kind of eerie beauty to it, like to the shape of the trees with no leaves and with these blackened branches. It was an eerie type of beauty that would never have existed without the fire. So it's that idea of like trying to find that when you feel like, all the energy that you had was taken from you and you kind of didn't even end up with anything at the end. Like it was just taken, and you didn't keep anything for yourself.
Yeah, that was called the Woolsey Fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, in your poem, Little Wings, there's a progression in the poem from writing to carving to tattooing secrets on your skin. What does that increasing intimacy with expression represent?
I guess it's like the idea of greater and greater permanency with each step that you take. So yeah, I think I would just say that, and then it goes back to that idea in some of the earlier poems of the visceral, like the emphasis on touch and visceral sensation, and then maybe taking more ownership of that, turning it into like a positive thing that involves agency of like choosing to carry and to embody your story rather than just having it forced upon you.
Gotcha. Well, we come to the final poem. Now, we haven't covered them all. Just to reiterate, this is not an exhaustive discussion. But the final poem of the collection and the collection's namesake, Cinder Girl Grows Wings, you describe yourself as, quote, "just me, old tortured girl, sending my stories of strange desires out into the universe." What does it feel like to share that part of yourself so openly in poetry?
It's a little tough. I'm not gonna lie. It feels a little tough, but it's also cathartic, and I hope that people can identify with it. That's the reason you publish something, I think, is that you hope people will read it and identify with it. And again, with what we've been talking about, the idea of like, consciously making your experience and your story into something that you have agency over. So like the act of publishing something as a book is doing that, you know. So I think that was just kind of what I had in mind when I put it all together and started looking for a publisher for all these different parts of myself put together into kind of a story and a progression.
Gotcha. And let me bring this up. This is something I've been wanting to ask you about since I saw it on your social media. Along with writing, you're involved in other artistic pursuits. So tell me about the aerial silks that I've seen on your social media. My niece actually does this.
Oh, fun. Yeah, I just kind of fell into doing that. I've always really loved dance. I mean, a couple of the poems in here mention dance. So I've always really been into like physical expression, but never really talented enough to do it as a career, but always tried to do it as much as I can. And somebody just invited me to the
There you
aerial
go, right
class.
there.
And yeah, I had
Beautiful
never
pose. Like,
I didn't think I could do it. I just kind of tagged along with somebody to the class, and I was like, "Oh God, my gosh, this is really fun. I really like this." So I started doing it all the time. There's not really more to the story than that, I don't think, except that I just love to like. I guess a more positive way of like embodying emotions, the way I talk about in the book, but it's a new way that I have of doing it that I guess is healthier.
yeah, I bet you activate muscles in your core you didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
Oh God, I can't imagine. Yeah, my niece like sends me videos, scares the hell out of me. She's like, I don't know how high in the air, all wrapped up, and then she just lets go and unravels and then
Yeah.
stops right before smacking the ground. Jesus, stop it. Yeah. So tell me about we were talking about, or I alluded to it earlier, your love of fairy tales. Tell me about the photo shoot you did for Lost Lands Collections. I believe you took on the role of Snow White.
Yeah, they built like a coffin that it wasn't just me, there were other people that got in the coffin, so everybody was kind of doing a different version of Snow White, but yeah, it was just for fun. But it was interesting to be inside the glass coffin, and they were taking photos from the outside. I guess it was a little bit like I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but actually this book had just come out when I did the photo shoot. So it was a little bit like bringing the book to life, because I talk about, like being in a cage in the book, and it was like being in a cage being in a coffin, but it made some really amazing photographs. But it was just a fun experience. Like, it was basically a group fairy tale photo shoot. So there were a lot of people there like dressing up in princess gowns or fairy gowns or knight outfits, and reenacting fairy tale scenes. So that's the kind of stuff I like to do for fun.
Well, what is your work life like these days? Do you have a lot of irons in the fire like you did initially, or have you kind of settled into one thing?
I've been like, I haven't been really writing for publication recently, so I guess I still have a lot of irons in the fire because I'm just experimenting with a lot of stuff. I don't really know what my next major project is going to be. So yeah, I think I'm kind of like in an experimental stage because I don't know that I want to write any more about this same kind of stuff from my past, and so I'm like want to move in a new direction. And I'm not quite sure what that would be yet. So definitely a lot of experimenting going on, I think would
Gotcha.
be.
Well, would you like to read a passage or
Sure.
from the
Yeah.
from the book? Okay.
Actually, I was thinking of reading Wildfire because I think that's actually my favorite poem from the collection.
All
That
right.
sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay. Wildfire. The city where I found my dungeon, my lovers and torturers, was known for its conflagrations. We humans who lived there did our best to cause destruction. Our tiny earthquakes and infernos, the ways we struck each other's flesh, arrowed cruel words into minds and planted them deep in beating hearts. But the earth watched our little battles, our victories and defeats, the pain growing inside us till we believed it so big it could smother an entire world. The earth watched and it laughed, harder and harder till it quaked and we measured its seismic waves. Harder still, till the earth could not keep from opening its mouth. Every year, it consumed us with fiery tongues, reminding us our little pains were pinpricks. We, with our dreams and desires and suffering, were the playthings of the universe, all discardable dolls. Our struggles were ash riding the Santa Anas, dust raining down the mountains, debris lost to the endless saltwater blue.
All right. Very nice. Well, have there been any significant events in your life since we last spoke?
Trying to remember when we last spoke.
Oh God, probably a year or so.
Yeah, not really, to be honest. Like, I'm still living in the same place, and I haven't really been doing anything super exciting. Starting to travel more, so that's nice. Like, I traveled to do the Photoshop shoot. That was in Connecticut. So hopefully, maybe some big international trips or something coming up. But other than that, nothing really.
Have you been hitting any cons at all?
No, that's a good idea. I should
Yeah.
do that. I've actually never been to one. So.
Yeah, I hadn't been to one until a year ago. And I went to Texas AuthorCon, then I went to the Ghoulish Book Festival. These are all in Texas. I don't have the time or money to go out of state at the moment. But one of these days, I'm going to go to the Scares That Care, the one in, what is it, Williamsburg, Virginia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I saw the social media posts from that one. I mean, I lost count of how many people were there that I would love to meet in person. Well, Stephanie, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, or let your readers know about?
No, I think just if you have read this book and you want to review it, that would be amazing. Even if it's not a positive review, that's fine. It's very hard to get attention for poetry books. They tend to struggle. A lot of people are just like, I don't want to read poetry. So, anything you can do to help out with a poetry book is going to be much, much, much appreciated. Not just for me, of course, I would appreciate it, but I think like the poetry community as a whole and like the horror poetry community, we're all like hoping to get more readers. So yeah, I think if you wanna help out horror poetry writers, just reviewing or getting the word out about any of our books will help all of us.
All right, sounds great. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Stephanie, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.